To say Oshinoko is an absolutely amazing show would be stupid, not because it's untrue, but because it would be stating the obvious. So many people have praised this show for its clever comedy, the guts to not shy away from sensitive topics, and incredible character writing. But one of the most common pieces of praise this show gets is how realistic it is. That's no surprise, because it is clear that the author of this story, Aka Akasaka, has done extensive research on the world of showbiz to accurately represent what typically happens in that world. And to that sentiment, I both agree and disagree. I don't think the events in Oshinoko are as realistic as people seem to think, and I believe, despite that statement sounding like a criticism, it's because of that the genius of the writing really shines through. Let's start with the most unrealistic part of the show, the supernatural element, aka the reincarnation. Obviously, no one is debating on whether this part of the show is realistic or not. Unlike the other events in the show, the genius here doesn't come from the realism, but rather how it tells the audience what they can expect from the rest of the show using that fantastical starting point. The world of showbiz can often seem like a fantasy, a world where you can live life in the spotlight, not needing to care about anything else but your flashy performances. And no matter if this was his main goal from the start, it seems likely that it is one of Akasaka's objectives to break that fantasy and tell a story that reveals some of the harsh truths behind this business. And what better way to start your story that aims to do that than to use one of the biggest fantasies there is as your premise? Given how some idol fans are like, I don't doubt that there are people that actually wish to be reborn as their favorite idol's child. It does sound appealing, not only being able to live life without a care in the world for the second time in your life, but also being able to spend time with the person you look up to the most, or even the person you are giving your unrequited love for. Seeing that fantasy, Akasaka asked the question, would you actually want that? In the beginning, it does seem like Aqua and Ruby are very fortunate to have been reborn as their favorite idol's child. But very quickly, they discover that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Not only can Ai not spend as much time with them due to how busy she is, their very existence as Ai's children is fuel for online cancellation, something that can crumble Ai's career overnight. The dream childhood of being held in the hands of your idol all day and getting all sorts of head starts through her doesn't really exist, because you cannot be seen with her in public without a very huge risk. In fact, the person they spend the most time with isn't even their idol mother, but instead their babysitter at the time. All of a sudden, being reborn as your favorite idol's child doesn't seem as appealing anymore. And then, to put the nail in the coffin, emotional damage! With this opening act, Akasaka tells us that even if this far-fetched fantasy did come true for you, what you would get would not be what you actually envisioned it to be. And if even a supernatural event can't let you fully fulfill your fantasies of the entertainment world, you shouldn't expect the entertainment industry itself to do so on its own. That sets the audience's expectation for the rest of the show, letting us know that this show is not going to expand on the existing fantasy of the entertainment industry, but instead aims to expose it. Akasaka here is using people's fantasies against them, using fantasy to destroy fantasy, opening our eyes to harsh truths in this fantasy to then tell a story within those harsh truths. This is why people were immediately hooked by that first episode. Not because it was hyper-realistic, but because it blends the fantasy with the real stuff. Now you might be starting to see what I meant in the beginning, when I said the show is genius, partly because it's not 100% realistic. Moving on to what happens after Ai's death, we get to see the journey the twins go on in the entertainment industry. Here's where a lot of people start to praise the show for being super realistic and how great the show is because of that. And again, I don't quite disagree with that, but I don't think that's entirely why it's so good. Aka Akasaka has done a damn good job making this world as close to the real world as possible. I mean, simply by the fact that the show uses the website's actual names makes it feel so much closer to home than the other shows that also aim for relatability. But the problem with mimicking the real world is that the real world is kinda boring. You're very rarely going to run into one interesting event after the other in real life. That's the reason why they always say it's based on real world events, and not just these are the real world events. And the same goes for Aqua and Ruby. Despite having no clout to him whatsoever in the very beginning, Aqua manages to only land big productions for himself one after the other. Starring as an extra villain in the TV adaptation of a popular manga, and only for one scene, is reasonable. Being in the same dating show with people that all seemingly have much more experience than him is a little weird. But getting chosen right away for a main character in a big budget stage adaptation of a mainstream manga/anime for his third job with no audition process just seems ridiculous. I won't claim to know anything about the entertainment industry, but I just don't see any real-life producers taking that kind of risk, especially with the stage adaptation due to it being live. Ruby's circumstances seem more reasonable, but not really by a lot. Being also a nobody herself, she manages to get two big-shot entertainers to join her idol group and lands their very first performance at what seems to be the premier idol event in Japan. Are these circumstances technically possible? I guess, but I don't think I would be wrong for saying that no aspiring actor or idol should expect to have this kind of experience. With how rare this kind of situation would be, it would be quite reasonable to say that this is pretty much fantasy set in the real world. But of course, I'm not here to bash this show for being unrealistic. While the individual events that happen may not be entirely realistic, the realistic part is in how the characters act within these events. Aqua getting invited to join Love Now purely because of his looks might be a little far-fetched, but what he does in the dating show is completely grounded in reality. People in reality shows do in fact lie. They will put on a character, and they will fake relationships to make the show more interesting. That is all based on real life, and so are all the other characters. As the one with the most experience, it makes perfect sense that Kana would feel pressured and responsible when they suddenly got this huge opportunity out of nowhere. And for the rookies that are Ruby and MEM-cho, it checks out that their excitement would trump over their nervousness, especially for the previously bedridden Ruby. Akane somehow slashing Yuki's face when going for a slap might be a little silly, but the way she reacts to the backlash, sadly, could not be more real. And for my favorite example, we can go back to Aqua. Despite Aqua setting himself on the path of revenge, he doesn't just become this one-dimensional character that only wants revenge, just like how most real-life humans aren't one-dimensional. Like a lot of us, even though he might not want to admit it, he still genuinely cares about other people, and in return, wants people to care about him back. It's very human of him, despite the dramatic revenge plot. For this story, Akasaka isn't just saying, "This is exactly what happens in the entertainment industry." I think that's being reductive of just how clever his writing is. Instead, he's saying that when a real person is put into such a situation, this is how they would act, and this is what would happen. That's why I said the strength of the story lies in it not being completely realistic. Because what's difficult isn't just keeping it realistic, but also having the right amount of fantasy and dramatization. I think a lot of people can simply write a realistic story, but few can dramatize it enough to make it interesting. And among those that can do that, even fewer can achieve the perfect balance between realism and drama, not just making you go, "Oh, that makes sense," but instead making you go, "Damn, that can actually happen to someone," all the while keeping you hooked on the story. I feel like if a less talented writer was handed this premise, they would have turned Aqua into that monster that only manipulates people to fuel his revenge plot. Or they might make Kana so depressed about her past that trying to get with Aqua would be her only purpose because he makes her feel good about herself. Would these make sense? Sure, but they wouldn't feel real like how we are feeling about the story we got. Akasaka used just the right amount of dramatization to keep us hooked on the story. Then, he puts the fantasy on a leash, never letting it run too wild and having it interfere with the realism. He has clearly demonstrated that, when we praise a story for being real, it's not the absence of dramatization we should celebrate, but instead how they are able to provide realistic consequences and repercussions to dramatize events. And yes, I know being able to dramatize events and stories properly isn't a brand new concept. I'm not exactly naming a brand new storytelling technique here. But I wanted to say all that because I feel like Akasaka truly has gotten this technique down to a science with this story. Everything in the show, if not just the premise alone, is just outlandish enough to constantly hold on to your attention, but always realistic enough so that the message of the story won't be lost in the craziness. What else can I say? Between this and Love is War, it is clear that Aka Akasaka is truly a master of his craft. As someone that only had the slightest idea about the inner goings of the entertainment industry, I'm so damn happy that I got to watch this well-researched story unfold and have it give me so much background info they usually keep tucked away. I mean, it's kinda crazy that this anime got greenlit in the first place. An anime about exposing the entertainment industry got the okay from some higher up in the entertainment industry? I sure hope this doesn't make him any enemies in the field. Or maybe it wouldn't have in the first place, cause that's how little I know about the industry. In any case, if you want to see more from me, like and subscribe to help me out, and tune into my streams when I go live here on YouTube. One last thing, Kana is best girl, fight me about it.